If World War I had a place that turned men into dust and blood, it was Verdun. For 300 relentless days, artillery never stopped. Trenches swallowed every meter, and Germany and France plunged into a brutal war of attrition. How did Verdun become history's most infamous meat grinder? Let's dive in. Let's dive. Section 1. The snow, the silence, the open window. February 25th, 1916. Fort Douaumont, northeast of Verdun. A wet, cutting snow drifts sideways across the ridge, blown by wind that smells of cordite and churned earth. The sky is low and the world is gray, the kind of light that makes men squint even when they aren't tired. Somewhere in the haze, German heavy guns keep coughing, each blast a slow, rolling thunder that seems to come from the ground itself. You don't see the shells land. You feel them first, deep in the ribs, then hear the savage crack as stone and frozen soil erupt in the distance. Pioneer Sergeant Kunze pulls his collar high and sinks lower behind a fold in the snow-crusted terrain. He is not a famous man. Not yet. He is a combat engineer, a pioneer from the 24th Brandenburg Infantry Regiment, 6th Infantry Division, the 3rd Corps. His job is to crawl forward, find the wire, find the weak point, and open a path. Today, the weak point is supposed to be a fortress. Douaumont is a shape more than a place at first. An enormous hump on the slope, half swallowed by fog and shell smoke. It was built for the last war and reinforced for the next. A concrete beast with a roof meters thick, armored turrets, deep galleries, and dry moats that can swallow a platoon. The French called it the keystone of Verdun. The Germans called it the lock on the door to France. Everyone knows its name. Everyone has heard the stories of what it can withstand. Kunze has heard them too. But he also remembers the Belgian forts in 1914. How the 420mm super heavy howitzers cracked them open like eggs. He remembers the rumors that the French have been stripping their forts, pulling guns away, leaving skeleton garrisons behind because fortresses are obsolete. He doesn't know if that's true. He only knows that the barrage has been pounding Douaumont since the battle began 4 days ago on February 21st. And still the fort squats there as if daring the world to try. Behind Kunze, men shift in the snow, whispering in short breaths. They're not stormtroopers in the later, polished sense. No skull badges, no special propaganda. But they are assault troops in reality. Chosen for nerve, equipped lightly, told to move fast and think for themselves. The weather makes everything worse. Visibility comes and goes in curtains. The ground is a slurry of ice, chalk, and smashed roots. Yet the German Fifth Army keeps pushing south, spilling over the shattered French forward line. The plan, at least at this level, is simple. Probe. If there is resistance, a market for artillery, or fall back. If there is a gap, go through it. They start crawling. The slope up to Douaumont is a graveyard of trees. Not fallen trees, trees that have been erased. Their stumps are splintered into black spears sticking out of craters. The snow doesn't lay clean here. It sits on powdery ash and broken limestone. Now and then, a shell lands close enough that the air seems to slap them. They duck instinctively, wait for the fragments to finish whining overhead. Then continue. Kunze's boots slide into the lip of a dry moat. He freezes. The moat should be swept by machine guns from wall casemates. French infantry should be watching every angle. But the moat is empty. Below them there is only blown snow and the faint smell of damp concrete. He peers left, right. The casemate embrasures are dark. No muzzle flash, no shouting, no movement. Is this a trap? A man murmurs behind him. Kunze doesn't answer. He gestures forward. They drop into the moat. It is colder down there, a windless trench of stone. Kunze moves along the wall until he finds the angle of a defensive coffre, one of the small blockhouses built to fire along the ditch. The door is ajar. He presses against it with his gloved hand. It swings inward, still nothing. Inside, the air is stale and smells faintly of rust and old smoke. A corridor leads deeper into the fort's belly. The walls are sweating. Water drips somewhere far away. Kunze takes out his rifle, more out of habit than expectation. He steps inside alone. His men hesitate. Their boots scrape on stone. They bite their lips and stare into the black. Kunze keeps going. He expects tripwires, a sentry, a shout in French. Instead, he finds emptiness. Corridors lit by weak, flickering lamps, rooms with bunks, crates of reserve equipment, a fortress waiting for its heart to beat. Down the main gallery, he hears voices now, distant and muffled. He follows the sound and turns a corner into a small chamber near a turret control passage. There are French soldiers there. Half a dozen, maybe more. Territorial reservists, older men by the look of them. Their uniforms are powdered with dust. Their faces are gray with exhaustion. They're not in firing positions. They're huddled around machinery, hands on levers, a 155mm turret somewhere above them, still trying to answer the German barrage. Their NCO, Chenot, looks up in confusion as the stranger appears out of the gloom. A beat of silence. Kunze levels his rifle. "Rendezvous," he says, voice hoarse but steady. The French freeze. One man's mouth falls open. Another reaches for something, then sees he is too late. There is no heroic last stand here. No bayonets crossing in the corridor. Only shock, only fatigue, only the sudden collapse of an assumption that Douaumont could not be entered like this. They raise their hands. Kunze marches them back into a side room and locks them inside. He moves deeper, checking passages, still half expecting a burst of rifle fire from some hidden embrasure. The fort is awake just enough to be haunted, echoing, hollow, absurdly quiet for the most fought-over position in France. He finds more French in the lower galleries, mostly sheltering from the shelling, unaware that the enemy has already walked into their fortress. Outside, the rest of the raiding party has finally worked up its courage to enter. Lieutenant Radke brings more men through the same undefended moat. They spread out through the labyrinth with growing disbelief. A fort that should take divisions to storm is being taken with boots and whispers. No shots are fired, not one. On the ridge above, the snow keeps falling as if nothing remarkable is happening at all. But within these concrete veins, something historic is sliding into place. Quietly, almost politely. The keystone of Verdun is falling, not to a great assault, but to a handful of pioneers who dared to check whether the door was locked. And when they realize it isn't, even they are stunned. Section 2. The message that no one believes. Kunze's breath hangs in the lamplight, like ghost smoke. He keeps expecting the fort to wake up, expecting a French officer to appear with a pistol and a furious shout, expecting a counterattack to burst through a side passage. But the galleries stay eerily still, as if the barrage above has hammered the place not just into silence, but into resignation. Lieutenant Radke finds him near an intersection of tunnels. The lieutenant's cheeks are red with cold and something close to disbelief. He looks around, listening. "How many?" he whispers. "A few," Kunze answers. "Maybe more. They surrendered." Radke blinks at him, then looks down the corridor toward the inner works. The fort's endless concrete ribs make every sound uncertain. Somewhere above, a turret groans with a slow mechanical rotation, then stops again. That's it. That's all Verdun's most famous fortress seems capable of offering. Radke steadies himself and starts issuing orders in low, clipped German. 2 men to secure the entrance. 2 to scout left. a fire team to follow him deeper. The pioneers begin moving like cautious cats, rifles raised, boots muffled by dust and damp. They find a telephone room first. Phones ripped from their hangers, wires slack like vines. A map chamber, the paper maps still pinned to boards, corners curled from humidity. A cluster of bunks where wool blankets lie abandoned. A kitchen with blackened pots and a half-burned stove. The place hasn't been evacuated in panic. It's been left thinly manned and half forgotten, as if the French army still can't decide whether forts matter. Then they find the main command post. There is no fighting there either. Only a dazed French lieutenant and a handful of men who stare at the intruders as if they've stepped through a mirage. For a moment, nobody moves. Both sides are trapped inside the same thought. This cannot be happening. Radka speaks first, voice calm, almost apologetic. You are surrounded. Lay down your arms. The French lieutenant looks at the wall behind Radka, listening for the machine guns that should be sowing the corridor with fire. There are none. He looks at his men, old reservists with hollow eyes. They are not built for heroics in these tunnels, not after 4 days of hammering from 305s and 420s. Slowly, as if in a dream, they surrender too. By mid-morning, German boots are everywhere in Fort Douaumont. The storming party is still tiny by fortress standards, dozens, not thousands. They hang lanterns in key junctions, post sentries at stairwells, mark off chambers with chalk, and keep pushing for the upper levels and turret galleries. The most dangerous moment comes not from French resistance, but from confusion. A German patrol opens a hatch toward the roofline and is hit in the face by icy wind. The roof is a moonscape of craters and smashed steel. Shells still fall nearby with dull thumps, flinging snow and concrete dust over the parapets. If French artillery realizes what has happened, the fort could become a tomb for its new owners. Radka forbids anyone from exposing themselves unnecessarily. They stay inside. They consolidate. They wait for the French to react. Down in a service corridor, a runner arrives breathless, helmet crusted white. It's a corporal from the regiment's forward elements. "Lieutenant, our battalion needs confirmation," he says. Did you take the fort?" Radke stares at him a second, half smiling. "Yes," he says, "we took it." The corporal frowns. "With how many men?" Radke gestures at the narrow gallery, at Kunza, at the small knot of pioneers. "This many." The corporal's face does a strange thing, like laughter that doesn't know it should be laughter. He swallows, salutes, then turns and runs back through the cold corridors to carry the most unbelievable message of the campaign so far. Out on the ruined slopes, that message spreads like a spark in dry grass. Officers in shell holes blink and ask for it again. Runners repeat it with emphasis. Signalers tap it out on field telephones. Each relay sounds more outrageous than the last. Fort Douaumont has fallen. Douaumont is ours. Captured without resistance. At Corps headquarters, staff officers look up from maps as if they've misheard. Douaumont was supposed to be a prize that required a major set-piece assault. No one had planned for it to fall today, much less to a reconnaissance probe. Some officers demand confirmation. Some suspect exaggeration. Others mutter that it must be a trap or a misunderstanding, perhaps just the outer works. Even on the German side, the truth feels like a rumor. But the fort is there. Their men are inside it. By noon, German flags are being carried up to safe exits and hung where they can be seen through drifting smoke. Not on the roof, too dangerous, but at embrasures and observation points beneath the parapet. The symbol doesn't matter as much as the fact. The keystone is out. The door to Verdun looks suddenly unlatched. In the French headquarters at Souilly, the news lands like a blunt instrument. General Hare, commander of the Verdun sector, stares at the report. He reads it twice. The second time slower, his jaw tightening. Douaumont wasn't supposed to be in play. Douaumont was supposed to be invulnerable even if the front line bent. Douaumont, with its 155mm turret and armored observation cupolas, was the anchor for every defensive plan on the East Bank. The staff phones ring. Messages pour in from panicked subordinates. Is it true? Have we lost Douaumont? The answers are vague and late, because the French themselves can scarcely believe it. Herr turns to his chief of staff. If Douaumont is gone, he says, voice flat, then Verdun is in mortal danger. A decision follows within hours. The sector needs a new commander, someone who understands that Verdun is no longer a local battle. It is becoming France's soul under siege. The call goes out to General Philippe Pétain, while the German pioneers in Douaumont eat cold rations in the dim galleries and listen to shells batter the roof that is now their roof. French trains begin packing with infantry. Trucks gather on the road from Bar-le-Duc. Divisions are told to move toward a place that most of them have only known as a name on a map. The fort that fell without a fight is about to create one of the greatest fights in French history. Section 3. Pétain arrive as the fortress becomes a trap. February 26, 1916. Souailly, the French command post southwest of Verdun. The air inside the chateau is thick with damp greatcoats, stale coffee, and the metallic tang of telephones that haven't stopped ringing in days. Outside, the road is clogged with staff cars and mud-spattered orderlies. Inside, men stand over maps whose edges are already curled from sweat. Verdun is a word spoken in a lower voice now, like a relative lying on a surgeon's table. General Philippe Pétain arrives without ceremony. He is 59, a tall, controlled figure with a trimmed mustache and the weary eyes of a man who has spent most of his life thinking about artillery and the patience of nations. He listens, says little, and absorbs the situation in the way a physician studies a feverish patient. First, the breathing, then the pulse, then the color of the skin. Douaumont has fallen. The French line is buckling along the East Bank. Units are exhausted, communications are collapsing, and the German Fifth Army is pressing south in a slow, grinding surge. No breakthrough yet. No dramatic cavalry dash. Just the awful pressure of an empire leaning forward. Pétain's first question is not romantic. How many shells do we have at Verdun today? His staff look at each other. Ammunition stocks are low. Rail lines are threatened. The roads are battered by shell fire and ice. Pétain nods once, already reaching the conclusion. Then we will build a road of shells, he says. A road of men. And we will not lose Verdun. By afternoon, he has issued orders that will define the battle. Artillery concentration on every German assembly area. Rotations of divisions so no unit stays too long in the furnace. And above all, a supply artery that must not stop. On the German side, Douaumont is becoming something else entirely. Inside the fort, Lieutenant Ratke paces the main gallery with a candle stub in his fist. Men are setting up machine gun posts in the caponnières, dragging ammunition crates down stairwells that were never meant for German boots. The French have not counterattacked directly yet, but the air above them is changing. French 75s begin probing the ridge. Their shells are smaller than the German heavies, but they come fast, sharp, and incessant. The fort's roof clatters as fragments scrape across armor. Dust drifts down through ventilation shafts. Every impact makes the concrete groan like an old ship in rough seas. Then the heavy guns wake up. A first 155mm shell hits the parapet with a deep, savage boom, as if a giant has slammed a hammer onto the fort's skull. The gallery lights flicker. Men flinch. A second shell lands closer. A third. The French have realized what has happened, and they are trying to erase it. Douaumont was built to survive bombardment, but it was built as a French fort anchored within a French defensive lattice. Now it is isolated inside a battlefield that is turning into a cauldron. Its observation cupolas, still intact, are suddenly prizes for French gunners. Its vents become weak points. Its entrances become kill zones. German officers in the upper levels press their faces to narrow slits and watch the slopes. Snow and smoke blur everything, but they can see movement. French columns filtering in, not in tidy parade lines, but in the ragged, urgent pulses of reinforcements thrown into a crisis. A corporal beside Rotka mutters, "They're coming." Rotka doesn't correct him. They have already come. On February 27th, the first French counter-thrusts begin to bite at Douaumont's outskirts. Not the fort yet. Its moats and glacis are still too dangerous under German cover fire. But the surrounding trenches and battered woods. French infantry move in dispersed waves, crouching low under their own barrage. They're a mix of units. Some shattered remnants of the opening days, some fresh arrivals who haven't yet learned what Verdun does to the mind. They don't have to be genius tacticians. The ground itself funnels them. Every fold, every crater ridge, every shattered tree line points toward Douaumont like arrows. German machine guns open up from the fort's shoulders. The fire is steady and clinical, cutting dark lanes through drifting snow. French bodies collapse into shell holes. Stretchers appear and disappear. The slope becomes slick with churned mud beneath the white. The Germans hold, but holding Douaumont is not the same as being safe inside it. By the end of the day, French artillery has ranged in. Shells impact the fort in a rhythm that feels almost deliberate. A direct hit on an outer casemate collapses part of a stairwell. 2 men are buried in dust and broken masonry before they can shout. Further down, a ventilation shaft is punctured and starts coughing smoke back into the galleries. Word spreads that French mortars have begun to drop rounds into the moat. Every entrance is now a threat. Every corridor feels like it might be the one that gets sealed behind you forever. Rotka brings Kunze and a pair of pioneers into the central chamber. "This fort is a gift," he says quietly. But gifts can become coffins. Kunze wipes grime from his cheek, leaving a gray streak. He nods. He has been in fortresses under bombardment before. Concrete protects, but it also traps. Still, they keep working. German telephones are strung. Signal lines reconnect Douaumont to the outside. Ammunition is stacked in corners. Water discipline is enforced. Sentries are told to shoot anything that moves in the moat. Above them, the roof shakes again. The French are not attacking blindly now. They are trying to turn Douaumont into a dead weight around Germany's neck, and in a sense, they succeed. Because even as Douaumont serves as a forward bastion for German artillery observers, it also forces the German Fifth Army to pour men into its defense. Whole companies are now tied to a fortress that was taken by a handful. The battle begins to organize itself around this concrete prize like iron filings around a magnet. Pétain knows it. In Soli, he leans over the map and taps the fort's symbol with a pencil. "We will take it back," he says, voice low. "But first we make Verdun unbreakable." Outside, the first long convoys begin rolling toward the front on the frozen road from Bar-le-Duc. Trucks nose to tail, headlights hooded, engines growling in the night. A road of shells, a road of men. The Voie Sacrée is being born in real time, and Fort Douaumont, once silent, is about to become the loudest place on earth. Section 4. The fort becomes a furnace. March 1st, 1916. Fort Douaumont. The snow is gone now in patches, churned into gray slush by boots and shrapnel. The ridge is a wasteland of craters and broken concrete. a landscape so violently rearranged that even men who marched here a week ago struggle to recognize it. The air is never still. It trembles constantly. First from French 75s snapping nearby like a whip, then from heavier guns that send a deeper, slower vibration through the fort's bones. Inside, Douaumont is no longer a prize you explore. It is a living thing you survive. Down in the main gallery, German soldiers move in a perpetual twilight, feet sliding on damp stone. Their breath condenses on the ceiling. Water drips down the walls in thin, icy streaks. The smell is a mix of wet wool, oil lamps, sweat, and the faint chemical bite of explosives that have seeped into the concrete itself. Every chamber has men in it now. Every side passage is stacked with supplies or bodies resting in broken sleep. Kunze walks past a line of infantry huddled against the wall, helmets tipped forward over their eyes. One of them is humming softly, some scrap of a folk song barely audible under the distant pounding. Another is writing a letter on his knee using a stub of pencil. The words wobble because the fort is shaking every few minutes. He reaches a stairwell leading upward. A sentry stops him. "French fire's bad up there," the sentry mutters. Kunze nods and continues anyway. The upper levels are hell-lighted. Not from flames, but from the intermittent glare of shells bursting outside slit windows. You catch glimpses of the ridge in half-second flashes. Black earth boiling upward, smoke rolling along the glacis, men sprinting between holes like insects under a boot. A German observation officer, Lieutenant von Brandis, crouches by a periscope mount, trying to keep it aligned while the fort quivers around him. "Targets on the west approach," he says to his signaler. 50 meters left of the dead tree stump. Call Battery 2. The signaler speaks into a field telephone and listens, jaw clenched. Then he glances at Kunze. "They're building up again," he says. "They is the French. By early March, Peiton's system is showing its teeth. French guns are arriving in huge numbers. Batteries of 155s, 120s, even heavies pulled from other sectors. They settle into muddy positions and begin a deliberate duel meant to pin German troops to the ridge and pulverize any attempt to expand from Douaumont. On the slopes, French infantry, rotated in fresh waves, probe and counterprobe. The Germans take a trench line at dawn. The French drag it back by noon. A shell hole becomes a strong point, then a charnel pit. Men fight not for villages anymore, but for nameless folds in earth that only matter because they overlook the fort. Each night, wrecked units limp back through the fort's shadow, and new ones arrive. German command responds the same way. Douaumont is now too important to lose. Reinforcements are sent in thick packets. Companies from the 52nd Infantry Regiment, Bavarians, Saxons, men who expected a push to Verdun, and now find themselves chained to a concrete mountain. With each incoming battalion, the fort grows more crowded. The dry moat that was empty on February 25th is now a trench stocked with ammunition crates, medical posts, spare rifles, and ration dumps. The galleries echo with boots, coughing, murmured prayers, and the constant scrape of equipment against stone. And then comes the first real lesson of Douaumont's new curse. A fortress protects you from shells, but it cannot protect you from what shells leave behind. On March 6th, French artillery scores a direct hit on an outer ventilation hood. Smoke pours into the fort. Not normal smoke, thick, choking, bitter. A shell has ignited stores of oil and lumber in an upper chamber. The fire spreads slowly at first, then greedily, fed by air shafts, turning galleries into chimneys. The garrison reacts in chaos. Men grab blankets, water buckets, anything. They rush toward the smoke and are driven back by heat. The fort's passages are narrow. Once smoke fills them, movement becomes panic. "Close the doors," someone shouts. "Where are the masks?" A pioneer squad tries to reach the burning chamber through a side stairwell. The heat is so intense it peels paint off the doors and makes rifle barrels too hot to hold. One man staggers out coughing, eyes streaming. Can't get through. The smoke thickens into a gray tide. It flows downward, clinging to ceilings, then dropping in ropes to the floor. Men begin to choke in their sleep. They wake thrashing, tearing at collars, stumbling into each other in the dark. A medic shoves a damp cloth over a private's mouth and drags him toward cleaner air, boots slipping on wet stone. Kunze finds himself in a crush at a junction. The lanterns are dim behind a soot haze. Shapes shove past him, blind. Up to the exits, a voice bellows. But up is where the fire is. Down is where the smoke is going. In one corridor, a machine gun crew collapses beside their weapon. Not wounded, just oxygen-starved. In another, a line of men tries to crawl in single file along the floor, where air is a hair less poisonous. When the fire finally burns itself down hours later, Douaumont is littered with bodies. Some are blackened by heat. Many are not scorched at all, just gray-faced, mouths open, eyes glazed, killed by smoke and suffocation that no heroic defense can answer. The Germans are shaken in a new way. They have faced shells and bullets. This was something else, a fortress turning on its occupants. The dead are carried into side chambers and laid in rows, helmets on their chests, boots still muddy. A chaplain murmurs prayers in the gloom. Men stand silently, not crying, not speaking. Just staring at the price of holding a fort they captured as if strolling into a cellar. French gunners do not see the bodies. They see only that Douaumont is still occupied. They keep firing. German command does not see the bodies either. They see a symbol that must not be surrendered. They keep feeding men into it. So the furnace resets. By mid-March, Douaumont is no longer the fort that fell without a fight. It is the fort that cannot be left, cannot be safely held, and cannot be ignored. It has become Verdun's beating heart of attrition. A concrete grinder for anyone who stands too close to it. Outside, the ridge continues to dissolve under artillery. Inside, men learn to live with the rhythm of doom. Shells above, smoke within, and the terrible certainty that the French will come for this place again. Section 5. The counterattacks and the cost of a symbol. Late March 1916. The slopes around Douaumont. Spring tries to arrive and fails. The thaw doesn't bring green yet, only mud. The snowmelt turns every crater into a brown pond. Dead horses bloat in shell holes. Rifles lie half buried like rusted bones. The air is damp enough that wool never fully dries, and cold enough that men shiver anyway. Verdun is learning a new season, not winter or spring, but continuous bombardment with changing weather. French counterattacks are coming now in a pattern that feels almost ritual. They begin with hours of artillery, not the wild hurricane of February, but a deliberate, methodical hammering meant to strip the ridge of German eyes and German machine guns. On the east bank, batteries of 75mm field guns crack in quick, angry bursts. Behind them, 155s and 220s thud, like doors slamming in a giant's house. The shells walk forward in lines, exploding in a crawl toward Douaumont's outskirts. Then the infantry rises. They don't charge in neat waves like the textbooks promised. At Verdun, men spill out in small packets, crouched low, darting from crater to crater. They are from the 33rd Corps, then the 20th. Then fresh divisions rotated in under Pétain's Noria system. Units that still have their full complement of officers and a few illusions left intact. A French lieutenant lifts his whistle and hesitates. The moment before he blows it is always the same. A breath where he imagines he might still survive. Then he blows. En avant, the men go. German machine guns answer instantly from trenches and from Douaumont's casemates. The slope in front of the fort is now pre-registered. Every likely approach already has a gun sighted into it, every crater line cross-fired. When the French appear, the ridge seems to open its jaws. The first wave drops. The second crawls over bodies. The third reaches the shattered remnants of a trench line, and for a moment, unbelievably, holds it. They fight at distances that don't feel like war so much as murder. A grenade thrown into a crater, a bayonet thrust through smoke, a pistol fired in a face-to-face stumble. Men lose direction because the landscape has no landmarks left. You can walk 100 meters and not know if you're moving toward Douaumont or away from it. When the French gain ground, it is always fragile. The Germans counterattack within hours, often without waiting for full daylight. These German counterattacks are smaller than the French imagine. Not grand assaults, more like sudden, furious lunges by storm parties trained in the new doctrine, short bursts of violence to take back a line before it hardens. A German platoon leader, Lieutenant Keller, gathers his remaining men in a trench shadowed by a splintered concrete block. 3 minutes after the barrage lifts, he says, "We go. No stopping to check if they're dead. You stab, you throw, you move." His men nod. Their faces are carved thin by sleeplessness. A few cross themselves. Most just check their grenades by feel. When the German barrage lifts, they erupt forward into a fog of dust. The collision is brutal and confusing. A French corporal swings a shovel at a shadow. A German private fires his rifle so close to another man's coat that the muzzle blast scorches wool. Someone screams in 2 languages at once. The trench line is taken back in 10 minutes. Then the shelling resumes and everybody goes to ground again, panting, bleeding, counting the missing. This seesaw lasts all of March and into April. The French do not yet have the strength to storm Douaumont itself. They're doing something more grinding, closing their fist around it, tightening the noose, forcing the Germans to spend men and shells just to keep their possession alive. Inside the fort, the garrison changes constantly. Units arrive, fight, bleed, and are evacuated down the same galleries where Kunze once walked into silence. The corridors don't feel haunted anymore. They feel busy in a sick, mechanical way. There are new warning signs painted on doors now. Munitions, poste de secours, danger gas. Gas shells are starting to fall around Douaumont too. Phosgene and tear gas mixed into the bombardment. Even when they don't penetrate the galleries, they creep into entrances and stairwells, leaving soldiers coughing until their throats go raw. Kunze watches a duo of infantrymen stumble in from a moat sentry post, masks dangling loose around their necks. "Phosgene?" he asks. One man shakes his head, eyes red. Tear gas. But it sticks to the ground. It gets into everything. Kunze knows what that means. He's a pioneer. He's watched gas change battlefields into invisible mines. He goes up to check the vents, makes sure baffles are in place, and feels the fort's air like a doctor taking a pulse. Douaumont is still standing, but it is not healthy. It is a crowded lung with smoke scars, struggling to breathe, while the French keep trying to suffocate it from the outside. Out on the ridge, German casualties climb. French casualties climb faster. Verdun is doing what Falkenhayn intended, bleeding France. But it is also bleeding Germany at a pace that no memorandum in Berlin can make feel acceptable. On March 31st, after another failed French push toward the fort's outer trenches, Pétain visits a forward command post. Not the ridge itself, too dangerous, but close enough that the rumble of Douaumont's bombardment is felt through the floorboards. The officers around him are exhausted. Some are barely older than boys. Pétain listens to their reports. Then he says the line that will echo through France like a vow. "Ils ne passeront pas." They shall not pass. It is not a prophecy. It is a decision. And like all decisions at Verdun, it carries a cost that can only be paid in bodies. By April, the fort has become a symbol larger than its tactical value. French newspapers speak of it as a stolen crown jewel. German papers speak of it as proof that the Fifth Army is advancing. Both are right in their own way. Both are trapped by what the fort now means. Men on both sides begin to talk about Douaumont the way sailors talk about a storm, something that doesn't care who you are. The French will throw themselves at it again because it is theirs. The Germans will hold it because losing it would mean admitting the offensive has stalled. And in the middle, Fort Douaumont waits, blackened inside, cratered outside, stuffed with men who no longer remember the strange quiet of February 25th. The fight for Verdun is no longer about a line on a map. It is about a fortress that fell without a fight, and the hundreds of thousands who will now fight because it did. Section 6. The air above Douaumont and the noose tightens. May 1916. The sky over Verdun is low and bruised, the color of old lead. From a distance, the ridge around Douaumont looks like a coastline after a storm. Nothing sharp, nothing alive, just a torn, ragged edge of earth meeting smoke. Up close, it's worse. The ground is a quilt of overlapping craters, some fresh with wet clay at the lip, others already filling with stagnant water and the pale shapes of things that didn't crawl out in time. The fight now stretches beyond trenches and galleries. It has climbed into the air. French aircraft begin appearing more often above the fort. Farman reconnaissance planes and Nieuport fighters, tiny wood and canvas insects trembling in the wind. Their engines buzz like angry saws. They come low, dipping through gaps in cloud, trying to photograph German batteries, trying to spot the glint of Douaumont's observation cupolas, trying to see what the smoke hides. German flak crackles upward in scattered bursts. Most shells miss, popping harmlessly in the gray. But the presence of eyes above changes everything. The fort's observers are no longer alone in their search. Verdun is becoming a three-dimensional battlefield, and Douaumont sits at its center like an anvil expecting another hammer blow. Inside, the German garrison has adapted to a war they never expected in February. The galleries are lined with direction signs now, scrawled in charcoal or painted in hurried black letters. Zugang Oest, East Access Sanitätsraum, Aid Room, Telephone MG stand. The men who read them are not the men who first entered. The fort has eaten regiments and spit out survivors. Some arrive for the first time and stare at the ceiling as if they've entered a cathedral made for death. Others return for a second tour and say nothing at all, because silence is cheaper than shock. Kunze is still here, though he has aged 10 years in 10 weeks. His hands are always stained with soot or oil. His uniform is stiff with dried mud in places it shouldn't be. When he sleeps, it is in short drops, the way a starving man drinks water. He climbs to a ventilation station one morning and finds a new cable laid beside the old. Telephone to Fleury line, a signaler tells him, tapping the wire. We need redundancy. French keep cutting the first. Kunze squints down the corridor. How many lines have they cut? The signaler lifts his shoulders. Enough. That is Verdun's new measurement now. Not meters gained, but lines cut, shells fired, men replaced. Outside, the French are tightening their grip. The West Bank battles, Le Mort, Homme, and Côte 304, have kept German reserves pinned. But Pétain's rotations are starting to pay in a quieter way. French units arriving at Verdun now come with a grim competence. They no longer imagine a quick victory. They come to endure, to hold, to push when the guns allow it, then to hold again. Their artillery has become smarter too. Less wasteful, more precise. They range in on Douaumont's approaches with cold patience. They drop shells not just on trenches, but on the paths between craters. the ravines where Germans move at night, the slight rises that give a machine gun an edge. At the same time, German command begins to understand the trap they have walked into. Falkenhayn's logic still holds on paper. Verdun is bleeding France. He can point to French divisions chewed up in every counterattack. He can count their losses and argue that Germany can sustain attrition longer. But the fort on the map has become a magnet that won't stop pulling iron. Every French push toward it demands German reinforcement. Every French barrage on it forces German guns to answer. Every rumor of a French breakthrough makes German corps commanders scramble units meant for other sectors. In May, German casualties around Douaumont rival the French ones assaulting it. The fort is doing to Germany what it was meant to do to France, consuming strength in chunks too expensive to admit. Still, nobody can let go. One night, a German company from the 10th Regiment moves into the outer trench line south of the fort. The men arrive soaked, shivering, stepping over corpses that have been there long enough for uniforms to fade into the soil. Their lieutenant, a sharp-faced man named Richter, gives quick instructions in a voice that tries to sound like a classroom. You will stay low. You will not bunch in the communication trenches. You will fire only when you see targets. French artillery will come at dawn. A private looks at him through a cracked monocle lens of mud on his goggles. How do you know, Herr Leutnant? Richter doesn't smile. Because the French always come at dawn. He is right. At first light, the barrage begins. It starts with 75s, short, snapping punches. Then the heavier shells arrive, thudding into the trench line like falling trees. Men flatten against the mud. The trench wall disintegrates. A dugout entrance caves in on the second hit, sealing 3 soldiers inside. Their fists pound weakly from behind the door of earth. The barrage lifts. French infantry surge forward, silhouettes leaning into smoke. They are close enough that you see their faces for a second. Pale, set, focused. German machine guns chatter from the fort's flanks. Richter's men fire from the trench lip. The air fills with that peculiar Verdun sound. Not one explosion, not one rifle crack, but a constant tearing roar that never lets your ears rest. The French take the trench. The Germans counterattack at noon. The trench is taken back. In the evening, Richter counts what is left of his company. He began with 180 men. He has 96 now. He can't point to what they gained except that Douaumont is still German. He looks toward the fort's shadow and feels something like anger at the concrete itself. It was supposed to be a breakthrough tool. It has become a hungry mouth. By late May, Pétain is no longer merely defending Verdun. He is preparing to reverse it. French artillery stockpiles grow on the Voie Sacrée. New guns are brought up under cover of night. Observation balloons rise behind the lines, tethered like pale moons, feeding coordinates to batteries that now know every fold of Douaumont's ridge. The stage is being set for something larger than the scattered lunges of March and April. Not yet the final blow. But the turning of the tide. Inside Fort Douaumont, Kunze feels the change before he can name it. Barrages arrive in denser patterns. Gas shells fall more regularly. The fort's walls shake longer, the pauses between impacts shrinking. It is as if the French are measuring the fort's breathing and preparing to squeeze until it stops. He passes a chamber where men are sleeping on straw. One murmurs in his dreams, calling for water. Another wakes and asks, voice raw, "Sergeant, are they coming again tonight?" Kunze hesitates. "They always come," he says, "but so do we." He keeps walking, because stopping now would mean listening too closely to what the fort has become. Outside, the French fist closes another fraction, and somewhere deep under the pounding roof, the pride of February 25th is fading into a colder understanding. They didn't seize Douaumont that day. Douaumont seized them. Section 7. The summer builds a storm. June 1916. East bank of the Meuse, in front of Fort Douaumont. The days are longer now, but that doesn't mean they're brighter. At Verdun, longer days just give the guns more hours to speak. The heat rises from crater water and rotting earth in a sour mist. Flies gather in black clouds wherever something has fallen and not been buried. The smell is so constant that men stop noticing it, until a breeze shifts and the battlefield suddenly reminds them what they are standing on. The French are learning how to attack Verdun without wasting themselves in blind waves. Pétain's grip on the sector has hardened into method. His artillery officers talk in grids and timings, not in glorious charges. Reconnaissance is thicker. Ranging shots are fewer. When the French barrage falls now, it falls like a trained fist. The Germans feel it. At Douaumont, a new commander rotates in every few weeks, and each arrives with the same first notebook entry. The fort is holding, but the men are breaking. The garrison isn't just fighting the French anymore. It's fighting the air, the damp, the smoke scars from March, the gas that creeps into stairwells. It's fighting exhaustion so deep that soldiers sometimes forget which side of the parapet they're on. One morning, Kunze climbs toward a service hatch and finds a private sitting with his back to the wall, rifle across his lap, staring at nothing. "Where's your section?" Kunze asks. The private blinks like a man surfacing from underwater. "Gone, Herr Sergeant," he says quietly. "They were in the trench line last night." The trench is not there now. Kunze doesn't argue. He knows what that means. He steps around him and keeps moving, because there is always something that needs fixing. Outside, the stakes are widening. Verdun is no longer a battle tied to Verdun alone. To the west, on the Somme, the British and French are preparing a massive offensive of their own, and German high command is pressed. Falkenhayn cannot admit Verdun has become a sinkhole. He doubles down. Reinforcements keep coming. The Fifth Army keeps pushing in short bites, trying to take Fort Souville, trying to crack the French line before the Somme erupts. So June opens with German pressure escalating again. On June 22nd and 23rd, the Germans unleash one of their most violent efforts since February, battering French positions with heavy shelling and gas, then storming toward the heights south of Douaumont. The gas is thick enough to stain the valleys greenish-white. French men cough behind masks, eyes blistering, while shells walk in lines across their trenches. German assault parties move fast in the wake of the barrage. They carry satchel charges, bundles of grenades, wire cutters, pistols. They fight by the doctrine of speed and shock. Punch holes, widen them, keep moving. For a few days, it seems the Germans might finally stretch beyond Douaumont's shadow and make it the platform it was meant to be. But Verdun has changed. The French line, thin in February, is elastic now. It bends, snaps back, bends again, never quite breaking. Their artillery answers with merciless timing. Their counterattacks are smaller, but better coordinated. When German storm parties seize a crater ridge or a trench line, French shells arrive so quickly that the position turns into a slurry of earth and men before German reinforcements can dig in. On June 24th, after an especially heavy German push, French rifles rise from the smoke and reclaim a lost sector in front of Fleury. The Germans retreat not in rout, but in exhaustion, leaving the ground behind because holding it would cost more men than they have left. And in the middle of all of this, Fort Douaumont waits with its teeth sunk deep into both sides. The French are not trying to retake it yet. Not directly. They are shaping the battlefield around it, cutting its tendons, turning its approaches into killing zones. Every German movement to or from Douaumont is observed now, by balloon, by airplane, by forward observers who have learned how to read the fort's silhouette through smoke. A platoon that tries to bring up rations in daylight gets shredded by shrapnel before it reaches the moat. A battery that fires too long from the fort's vicinity is bracketed and smashed within an hour. So the Germans move at night. Every night becomes a logistics raid. Columns of shadow men carrying boxes of ammunition, coils of wire, sacks of bread, sometimes just water in cans. They pick their way through crater fields by memory, because there are no paths anymore. The French fire harassing barrages along likely routes, forcing the Germans to spread and crawl. The night is no kinder than the day. It just hides the cruelty. Kunze leads one of these nightly runs in early July, guiding a team of pioneers dragging a sled of supplies through a ravine. They reach a crater lip and freeze as a French flare rises, turning the world white. For a second, the ridge is a stage. Hunched silhouettes, torn earth, a shattered fort looming behind them like a black ship. Machine guns open instantly from somewhere unseen. Bullets whip across the crater edge. Kunze shoves his men down. "Stay still," he hisses. They fire at movement. The flare dies. Darkness returns. For 10 heartbeats, only breathing and distant thunder. Then they crawl again. By the time they reach the fort's moat, 2 men are missing. No one asks exactly where they fell. At Verdun, you don't go looking for a missing man in the dark, unless you want to vanish too. Inside Douaumont, the supplies are unloaded silently. A medic takes one look at Kunze's men and shakes his head. "New unit?" he asks. Kunze shrugs. "Old men in new places." He watches the medic write names on a clipboard, then cross some out when it turns out the men don't have tags anymore. Or the tags belong to someone else. Identity at Verdun is often a guess. The fort is full of whispers about what's coming. Some say the Germans will abandon it because the Somme will demand the men. Others say a final push will take Souville and Verdun will collapse. French prisoners brought through the galleries say Pétain is gathering guns for something big. German officers say the French are finished. Most soldiers say nothing, because predicting Verdun feels like trying to predict the ocean. Yet even without prophecy, the battlefield is leaning in a new direction now. You can feel it in the tempo of artillery, in the growing confidence of French counter-battery fire, in the way German assaults are shorter and more desperate. The French are not just surviving Verdun anymore. They are preparing to take it back. And when that moment comes, Fort Douaumont will be the crown jewel they aim for first. Because symbols matter here as much as trenches. Kunze sits in a side chamber that night, back against cold concrete, and listens to the fort breathe. Vent fans grinding, water dripping, men coughing in their sleep. Above, French shells continue to arrive in regular pulses, like a giant testing a door again and again, waiting for the hinge to weaken. The hinge is weakening. The summer is building a storm. Section 8. The French guns learn the fort's pulse. August 1916. The ridge south of Douaumont is a sun-baked ruin. Heat doesn't soften Verdun. It ferments it. The mud of spring has dried into cracked clay that breaks underfoot like old pottery. Crater ponds shrink into scummy basins where flies breed thick enough to look like smoke. The air tastes of dust, powder, and decay. Men sweat through uniforms that never fully lose the stink of the dead. The battlefield is loud in the day and somehow louder at night, because in the dark you hear what you can't see. A shell landing half a kilometer away feels like a fist in your chest. A direct hit on the fort makes the gallery lamps tremble. The fort has become a metronome for suffering, each impact marking the next tick of Verdun's long clock. Inside Douaumont, the Germans have settled into a grim routine. A shift for sentries in the moats. A shift for machine gun crews at casemates. 2 hours to sleep if you're lucky. 4 if you've already stopped being afraid of nightmares. Food when it arrives. Water when it isn't tainted by dust. Kunze walks the main gallery with a clipboard now. Not because clipboards matter, but because writing things down gives shape to chaos. He checks baffles, notes damage from the last barrage, counts gas masks, counts candles, counts men who look as if they might fall asleep standing. A lieutenant passes him at a junction, rubbing his eyes. French are changing their fire, the lieutenant mutters. Kunze stops. How? Shorter bursts, closer intervals. They're walking it like they know the fort. They do. Over the past weeks, French artillery officers have been studying Douaumont the way hunters study a stag. They've learned its silhouette, its approaches, its rhythm of reinforcement. With observation balloons and aerial photographs, they've plotted the German trenches around it into a living grid. They've timed German night convoys, listened to the fort's gun flashes, watched the way smoke drifts from vents after a gas shell. They're no longer firing at a fort. They're firing at a pattern. In early August, French counter-battery begins to crush German positions near Douaumont with unnerving speed. A German 150mm battery fires from the reverse slope in the morning. By noon, French shells are dropping directly onto its pits. Ammo dumps that once felt safe behind folds of ground now erupt in sudden orange geysers. Communication trenches vanish in single, precise salvos. German officers start to whisper the same thought. They can see us, even when they can't. That feeling spreads like damp in wool. It makes men flinch at harmless sounds, makes them crawl instead of walk, makes them hesitate before lighting a cigarette. The fort is still shielding them from direct rifle fire, but it can't shield them from the psychological bleed of being watched. And behind the French line, something bigger is growing. Peyton's supply road has never stopped. Every day more guns arrive. 155s, 220s, 270s. Dragged in by tractors, by horses, by manpower that groans under steel. Ammunition parks swell in dugout valleys. New batteries are hidden beneath camouflage nets that look like dying forests. The French are not improvising anymore. They are assembling a hammer. They're waiting for the right moment to swing. The German High Command senses this too, though they interpret it through their own lens. Verdun was meant to be an attrition trap. If French shells are increasing, if French counterattacks are sharpening, Falkenhayn argues that it means the trap is still working. France is still pouring blood into Verdun, but at the front, the blood is no longer only French. German infantry officers arriving on the ridge now come with dark humor instead of confidence. One captain steps into the fort after a night march, looks around the soot-smeared gallery, and says to no one in particular, "So this is where divisions go to die slowly." No one laughs because it isn't a joke. A week later, a rumor slips through the fort like a rat. That Falkenhayn might be replaced. That Verdun has become politically too expensive. That the Somme is grinding Germany in the west, and Verdun can't be sustained at this cost. Some men hope it means they'll be pulled out. Others fear it means they'll be held here even longer, because retreat now would dishonor the dead. The fort doesn't care about their hopes. It keeps consuming time. On August 18th, French artillery unleashes one of its heaviest concentrations yet around Douaumont. Not a full offensive barrage, but a rehearsal. It begins at dawn with a rolling thunder that makes even veteran soldiers glance upward. For 3 hours, shells fall in layered lines. First on German forward trenches, then on the communication routes, then on the fort's outer works. The pattern is clinical. It does not rage, it measures. German troops try to move laterally between sectors and are cut down by air bursts. A ration party in the moat is wiped out when a shell lands at the lip and pours fragments down like water. The fort's chimneys belch dust. Men cough into their sleeves and taste concrete grit. Then, abruptly, the barrage stops. For a few heartbeats, there is quiet so sharp it feels unreal. Men look at each other in dim light, listening for infantry feet. None come. The French aren't attacking today. They're teaching the Germans a lesson. We can do this whenever we want. Kunze climbs later to an upper passage and peers out of a narrow slit. The ridge below is smoking. A few German stretcher teams move with cautious speed, like ants over a stove. Beyond them, through haze, you can see French lines that look disturbingly intact. Organized, sheltered, waiting. He has a thought he doesn't like and can't quite kill. They're not tired yet. The German garrison is tired. Bone tired. The kind of tired that makes your fingers clumsy when you load a rifle. That makes you wonder if a shell overhead is yours or theirs. They've been in the fort for months. They've survived fire, smoke, gas, and the endless seesaw outside. Each day now feels less like holding a victory and more like holding a weight that keeps getting heavier. Toward the end of August, a new German division arrives to relieve part of the garrison. The men file in silently, eyes widening at the stained concrete, the stacked rifles, the body scent lodged in the walls. A veteran from the old garrison watches them settle and says quietly to one of the newcomers, "Don't learn the corridors too well. You'll only hate them." The newcomer blinks. Why? The veteran looks up as another shell lands on the roof. Slow and deep. Because the French are coming for this place. And when they do, these corridors will remember our names. Outside, the French hammer is almost ready. Inside, Douaumont waits, loaded with men who know in their marrow that a storm doesn't announce itself until the first tree bends. Section 9. The day the sky fell and the fort changed hands. September 1916. Verdun's east bank is no longer a battlefield in motion. It is a battlefield being set. Every night now, French engineers creep forward with wire and picks, widening saps, cutting new communication trenches, turning shell holes into stepping stones. They work under the kind of silence that only exists between artillery schedules. When a German flare rises, they freeze flat in the mud. When it dies, they move again. This is not the frantic, improvised Verdun of February. This is a patient Verdun, taking shape for something decisive. Behind them, far back from the ridge where German observers can't easily see, the French artillery park has grown monstrous. Railway guns sit on spurs like steel dinosaurs. Their barrels are so long they seem to bend the horizon. 155s are dug in wheel to wheel. 220s and 270s are hidden under nets. Ammunition stacks rise in orderly walls. Gunners rehearse timings with stopwatches, calling out numbers that mean nothing to a man in a trench, but everything to a battery commander trying to make hell move forward in measured steps. General Robert Nivelle has taken growing control of the counteroffensive planning with General Charles Mangin, and their mood is different from Pétain's winter stiffness. Pétain wants Verdun to live. Nivelle wants Verdun to strike back. Their target is not a village, not a line, not a ridge. It is Douaumont. By late September, French reconnaissance planes return with clear photographs of the fort's broken roof and the webs of German trenches around it. Analysts mark the images with grease pencil circles. A collapsed casemate here, a crater field there, a new German gun slit opened last week. The fort is old marble to their eyes now, every crack known. On the German side, the men inside Douaumont sense that knowledge like a cold draft. The French barrages are no longer only harassing. They are shaping fire in multiples, landing in tight sequences that funnel German movement into predictable routes. Every time a German repair party tries to patch a parapet or reseat a machine gun, shells arrive to discourage them. German officers mutter that the French are counting their breaths. Kunze sees it in the smallest ways. A corridor that used to stay clear is suddenly dusted with fresh grit every hour. A hatch that was safe to open at dawn now feels like a death wish because French guns seem to wake there too. The fort's air is heavier, not just with smoke residue but with anticipation. Men speak softly. They check masks. They count grenades like rosary beads. There is a look that starts appearing on faces. a kind of inward bracing, like a boxer who knows the next round is the one where someone falls. October 20th. The first warning arrives as a roar from the south, deeper than anything they have heard since February. It is not the usual Verdun thunder of field artillery. This is slow thunder, the kind that travels through rock before sound. A shell the size of a small car lands near the fort and the whole structure shudders. Dust bursts from ceiling seams. Lanterns swing. Men instinctively crouch. "What was that?" a private gasps. "Railway gun," someone answers. 400 millimeters, maybe. No one knows for certain. They only know that if the French are placing guns like that, this is no rehearsal. October 21st and 22nd. 2 days where the sky seems to lower. French heavy shells begin to fall with crushing regularity. Some hit the roof and detonate with a metallic crack, sending fragments skating across armored turrets. Others slam into the slopes and loft geysers of earth high enough to blot out daylight. The rhythm is deliberate. The French are smashing the German trench belts first, collapsing communication lines, severing the fort from its outer skin. German troops in forward trenches die in place, buried in walls that turn to slurry when the big shells land. Survivors stagger back toward the fort through a storm of dust, some without rifles, some without helmets, all without a coherent front line to return to. By the night of the 22nd, Douaumont is packed tighter than ever. Wounded men, shaken men, fresh reinforcements who arrive too late to be anything but targets. Kunze stands at a junction and watches stretchers pass. A medic's hands are black with blood and soot. A man on a stretcher keeps asking if it's morning yet. Another doesn't move, eyes open, staring at the ceiling as if the last shell blast has frozen his thoughts mid-sentence. October 23rd. At dawn, the French unleash the barrage that makes all previous Verdun barrages feel like preludes. It begins with every caliber at once. 75s crack in rapid chains. 155s thump in overlapping waves. The big railway guns speak like gods clearing their throats. Shells burst on the glacis, in the moats, on the roof, on every trench that might hide a German. The air outside becomes a continuous white churn of explosions and smoke pillars. The ground doesn't shake in pulses anymore. It trembles constantly, like a living thing having a seizure. Inside the fort, men are thrown against walls by concussions that find their way down stairwells. Some chambers lose power and drop into blackness. In the dark, you hear the fort's own voice. Concrete cracking, steel groaning, small slides of rubble in side passages. Kunze crawls to a ventilation control panel and slaps valves shut to keep smoke from pouring down. His hands are shaking, not from fear alone, but because the vibration never stops. A German officer shouts down the gallery, "Stay away from the entrances, they're bracketing the moats." Another shell hits above. A chunk of dust and pebbles rains down. Men cough, swear, laugh too loudly at nothing. At noon, the barrage shifts. You can hear it even through concrete. The French fire begins to creep forward, walking away from the fort's outer defenses and onto the ground behind. That is the signal no German wants to hear. It means French infantry are about to move. In the French trenches south of Douaumont, men of Mangins' attack divisions, among them regiments of the 38th Infantry Division and colonial troops, rise into a world that has already been pulverized for them. They move in dispersed files behind the curtain of shell bursts, stepping over wires shredded into black ribbons. The ground is so torn that they don't so much advance as swim through craters. They are not charging a fortress in the old style. They are following artillery like a rolling wall, closing distance while German defenders are still ducking. The Germans in the fort's outer trenches try to fire. Many cannot. Their machine guns have been smashed, their rifles clogged with grit, their lines ruptured. Those who do fire are swallowed by French shells that descend the moment a muzzle flashes. French grenadiers reach the moat edges. They find, to their amazement, that whole stretches are empty or filled with stunned Germans who barely lift their hands. The barrage has not just crushed earth, it has crushed certainty. It has turned defenders into survivors. A French captain shouts, "To the entrances, before they recover." They cross the moat on rubble, on ladders, on the backs of shattered parapets. They find hatches blown open, doors jammed crooked, passages half choked with dust. Then they're inside. The first French squads collide with German sentries in the lower galleries. For a moment, it becomes the kind of close fight Verdun specializes in. Grenades in corridors, pistol shots ricocheting off concrete, men grappling in smoke. Kunze hears it before he sees it. The sudden, sharp chaos of voices that are not German. Par ici, grenades, vite! He spins, rifle up. A French soldier appears at the mouth of a side passage 15 meters away, ghostly through dust, bayonet forward. Time slows into terrible clarity. Kunze fires. The Frenchman drops. Another steps over him. Kunze throws a grenade. The blast thumps the corridor, scatters fragments, fills the air with chalky smoke. The Germans try to concentrate. Officers yell orders. Units scramble to seal passages. But the fort is a maze, and now the maze has been invaded from multiple entry points at once. Each corridor becomes a separate battle. Each stairwell a choke point that changes hands twice in 5 minutes. And above everything, the French artillery continues to fall, with a precision the Germans now understand too well. The fort's roof is being hammered into submission, while its belly is being pried open from within. By late afternoon on October 24th, the truth is unavoidable. Douaumont is lost. A German commander in the central gallery gives the order nobody dares to say aloud at Verdun. Withdraw, save who you can. Men pull back through smoke and collapsing side passages, abandoning machine guns they cannot carry, leaving wounded who cannot walk. Some sob in rage. Some go numb. Some only feel relief that the fort, which has held them captive all year, is finally letting them go. French troops push deeper, raising tricolor flags in chambers that have smelled German sweat for 8 months. They find lanterns still burning, half-eaten rations, rows of German dead laid out from March and never moved. When the last German pockets spit their final shots and fall silent, Fort Douaumont belongs to France again. Not because it was stormed in one glorious rush, but because the French learned its pulse, then stopped its breath. Section 10, The Echo After the Fall, October 25th, 1916. Fort Douaumont. Morning comes pale and cautious, as if even daylight is uncertain it's allowed back on this ridge. The smoke has thinned enough to show what the battle has done. A roof cratered like a plowed field, parapets chewed into jagged teeth, the surrounding slopes scraped nearly flat by months of shell fire. The fort sits there once again under a French flag, but it doesn't feel like a victory monument. It feels like a wounded animal reclaimed from a trap. Inside, French soldiers move through the galleries with a mix of awe and revulsion. They are men of Mangan's attack divisions, many of them colonial troops who have fought through the worst summer Verdun could invent. Their boots splash in water that leaks steadily from cracked concrete. Their lamps throw long, nervous shadows down corridors that smell of stale smoke and old death. They are stepping into a place that has been German for 8 months, and the fort tells that story in every detail. A French sergeant leads his squad past a chamber stacked with German ammunition boxes, the stenciled lettering still sharp. Another room holds rows of makeshift bunks. Planks on stone, blankets folded in the neat, tired way soldiers do when they're too worn to care. Along one wall, a dozen German helmets are lined up over bodies, carefully laid out on straw. Some of the corpses are fresh, Some are ancient by Verdun standards, their uniforms bleached to the same gray as the stone. The French sergeant swallows and says softly, almost to himself, "Mon Dieu, they lived like miners in here." A corporal behind him murmurs, "Or like men buried alive." They keep moving. In the central gallery, French engineers begin making immediate assessments. They measure collapsed stairwells, mark unsafe passages, test ventilation. The fort is a labyrinth no one truly controls until it is mapped again. And mapping a fortress while shells still fall outside is a kind of bravery that doesn't get medals. Outside the fort, the ridge is still alive with gunfire. German artillery, humiliated and furious, begins battering Douaumont from the moment the French flag appears. It is not a random barrage. It is a punishment. Heavy shells slam into slopes and parapets as if trying to shake the French loose like ants. French gunners answer without hesitation now. Their counter-battery fire hunts German guns with a confidence born from months of practice. The East Bank becomes a snarling duel of steel. But the rhythm has changed. The Germans are no longer dictating the tempo. In German headquarters, the loss of Douaumont lands like a blow to the ribs. Officers who once toasted the bloodless capture now stare at maps with narrow, exhausted eyes. In 8 months, the fort has become the emblem of their Verdun offensive. Its fall is not just a tactical setback. It is a public wound. It tells Berlin and the German public something they have been resisting all year. Verdun is not being won. Some staff insist it must be retaken immediately. Others look at casualty tables and the demands of the Somme and feel cold dread. The Fifth Army does attempt local counter-thrusts in the next days. Probing attacks against the approaches, short storm party lunges in the crater fields. They gain meters and lose companies. French artillery smashes their assembly areas before they can mass. Every German push now meets a defense that looks less like desperation and more like a machine. At the front, German infantry feel the shift in their bones. A Bavarian platoon sent forward on October 27th to reconnoiter the fort's outer trenches finds itself pinned within minutes. Not by a single French line, but by overlapping fire from multiple angles. Their lieutenant tries to wave men left toward a crater ridge. A French shell bursts directly on the ridge before he finishes the gesture. He lowers his arms slowly, as if the air is telling him, no. They pull back in slices, leaving bodies in holes they can't even mark. Douaumont is now out of their reach in a way it wasn't in February. Then, the fort was thinly held, half forgotten. Now, it is the heart of a French system that has learned the Verdun battlefield like a second language. For French soldiers, the retaking brings something complicated. There is pride, yes. They know what Douaumont meant in February, the shock, the shame. They know they have reversed a myth. But they also walk among the fort's scars and feel the price in their mouths. How many men are inside these walls as dust? How many waves died in front of its moat while the fort itself remained a hunched, indifferent shape? At a temporary aid post in a casemate, a French medic cleans blood from his hands and hears shuffling behind him. A young infantryman stands in the doorway, eyes wide. "Mon capitaine," he asks, voice unsteady, "is Verdun over now?" The medic doesn't answer right away. He gestures vaguely toward the ceiling, toward the constant vibration. "You hear that?" he says. "That means Verdun is not over." And it isn't. Douaumont's recapture is a turning point. But Verdun's climactic tide is still rolling. The French High Command knows there is another fortress to reclaim. Fort Vaux, further east, where Commandant Raynal's men fought thirst and darkness in June. Vaux is still German. So is much of the high ground that was won and lost all year. In November, French artillery begins another careful build. The same method that cracked Douaumont is turned toward Vaux and the ridge itself. Each battery is fed by the Voie Sacrée that never sleeps. Each infantry division rotates through the furnace with a Noria system that keeps men alive just long enough to fight again. The Germans, already stretched between Verdun and the Somme, start to yield not in collapse, but in slow retreat. They dig rearguard lines. They shorten their front. They fall back a trench at a time when the math of shells and men no longer favors holding. Standing on Douaumont's broken roof one evening, briefly, before German shells force him down, a French lieutenant looks across the east bank and sees what he hasn't seen since February. Ground that is not advancing toward Verdun. Ground that is easing away. It is subtle, it is measured in craters, but it is real. Douaumont has changed hands again. And with it, the story of Verdun has begun to change too. From a fortress stolen in silence to a fortress regained in thunder. The meat grinder is still turning. But now, at last, it is turning in France's direction. Section 11. The last roll of the grinder. November 2nd, 1916. Fort Vaux, east of Douaumont. A bitter wind scrapes across the ridgeline, cold enough to make fingers numb inside gloves. The clouds hang low again, the way they did in February, and Verdun feels like it's trying to circle back to its beginning. But it can't. Too much blood has passed through this ground. Too many shells have rewritten the map. French guns open before dawn, not in a chaotic hurricane, but in a steady, layered crush. The batteries that mastered Douaumont now do the same to Vaux. A slow climb of fire, then a sudden, concentrated descent. The ridge around the fort dissolves into smoke. German trenches vanish in curtains of earth. The barrage creeps forward like a heavy door swinging shut, leaving no safe corner behind it. When French infantry rise, they move with a confidence that would have seemed impossible months ago. They've learned Verdun's grammar. Advance behind fire. Take what's left. Dig before the counterattack. Among them are men who fought at Douaumont in October and carry the practical calm of survivors. There is no cheering, no speeches, only clipped orders and the relentless discipline of an army that has decided it will finish what it began 8 months ago. They reach Fort Vaux by mid-morning. The fort is wrecked but familiar. Dark galleries, smashed cupolas, stairwells that smell of smoke and old thirst. German defenders inside are exhausted shadows. Some fight, many can't. When the last pockets are cleared, Vaux is French again too. The news rolls backward through the French lines like warmth. Vaux is ours. Men who haven't smiled in weeks do now, briefly, like people remembering how. It isn't joy exactly. It's relief edged with grief. Verdun has given them a victory that feels less like triumph and more like survival with meaning. On the German side, the reaction is colder. Orders come down to withdraw from certain exposed ground. Not a rout. Not surrender. A controlled, stubborn retreat into shorter lines that can be held with fewer men. Verdun is no longer a place Germany is trying to win. It is a place Germany is trying to stop losing too quickly. In the battered trenches opposite Vaux, a German lieutenant unfolds a message and reads it once to his platoon. We hold until nightfall. Then we fall back 200 meters to the prepared line. A private blinks at him. We're leaving, after all this? The lieutenant looks at the man's face. Mud, hollow cheeks, eyes reddened by gas and sleeplessness. We're not leaving Verdun, he says softly. We're leaving death where it stands. Night brings movement across the east bank. German columns slide backward in cautious files, carrying what they can, leaving what they must. Field guns are hauled out. Machine guns are dragged by straps. Wounded men are propped on poles and leaned between comrades because there are never enough stretchers. The French follow carefully, not in reckless pursuit, but in measured pressure. Their artillery steps forward, not by guesswork now, but by plotted grids. Every time Germans dig in, French shells find them within hours. Verdun has become an equation France can solve. Somewhere in this retreat, Kunze is still alive. He has not been at Douaumont since the last days before its fall. His pioneer group was pulled out in September after a collapse in the upper works injured half his men. He spent weeks in a field hospital coughing up dust, then was sent back to an engineer detachment behind the line, where he built revetments and repaired wire under shell fire that somehow felt lighter than the fort's suffocating breath. Now he marches backward with the rest, shoulders slumped under a pack that feels heavier than it should. He passes a ruined trench that once faced Douaumont's shadow. The ground is barely recognizable. The ridge looks like a broken jaw. He remembers the quiet of February 25th. The open casemate door, the stale air, the French reservists lifting their hands in disbelief. It feels like a different lifetime. Not because time has passed, but because the world that allowed that moment no longer exists. By late November, French counteroffensives have retaken much of the East Bank line that was lost in the spring. Each gain is careful, paid for, and immediately stabilized. The French do not chase glory here. They chase the reset of the front to something bearable. December 15th, 1916. The final French offensive begins before dawn, with a barrage that seems to lift the earth out of itself. The guns are everywhere now, layered deep and firing in synchronized waves. Where Verdun once felt like scattered storms, it now feels like a single weather system controlled by French hands. German positions on the ridges around Douaumont and Vaux buckle under the weight. Trenches collapse into craters before defenders can climb out. French infantry advances in cold, practiced steps, stepping through smoke into positions already half emptied by the barrage's cruelty. German rearguards fight bitterly. They do not want Verdun to end as a humiliation. In some places, the fighting is hand-to-hand in sleet and chalk dust. But the German lines are too thin now. Their reserves are tied to the Somme and the Eastern Front. Their men are tired in a way that no more courage can fix. By December 18th, the French have reoccupied nearly all the ground that was fought over since February. The front settles back to roughly where it began. Verdun ends not with a parade, but with a slowing of the guns, like a furnace finally running out of fuel. On the east bank, French soldiers stand in trenches that actually have shapes again. Some stare toward the ruins and feel nothing at all. Others feel the sudden emptiness of a sound that has been constant for 302 days. A few weep quietly, not for victory, but for the faces that won't be rotated out by the Noria ever again. Pétain walks through a forward position on the final day, boots caked white with chalk. An officer hands him casualty reports. He reads them, expression unmoving. "They held," someone says beside him. Pétain nods once. They did. That is all he gives the moment. Because Verdun is not a battle that fits into celebration. It is a scar. It's a place where France learned it could endure any weight if the nation chose to endure together. It's a place where Germany learned that attrition cuts both hands that wield it. Weeks later, as the winter settles, Fort Douaumont sits under French control again, cratered and blackened, no longer a myth of invincibility, but a monument to what men did to each other to prove a point. Kunze, marching with the retreating remnants, carries his own quiet truth away from Verdun. A fortress can fall in silence and still cost an army its soul. Verdun ended without a clear victor, but it proved a terrifying truth. In industrial war, survival can be the only win. Hundreds of thousands on both sides paid for a few miles of ground. Remember Verdun not for glory, but as a warning of what attrition demands. Thanks for watching.